Good evening and welcome to the Audit and Standards meeting of Melton Borough Council. Members are reminded that we'll be using the audio-visual system this evening, and the meeting will also be streamed live on YouTube. Members are asked to physically raise their hands in the usual way to indicate that they may wish to speak, and to use their microphones when speaking for the benefit of all present. The microphone is live when the red light displays. Please switch mobile phones to silent, and I've just done that myself. I will now provide a reminder of the evacuation procedure. We don't have any members of the public, but just for expediency, in the event of having to evacuate the council chamber, please leave by one of the 6 emergency exits around the sides of the chamber, and please assemble in the far side of the front car park nearest the park entrance. Officers will be on hand to assist persons who require any assistance. Public recording of the meeting. There is legislation that allows the public to film, record or use social media at a council meeting. This must not be disruptive to the good order of the meeting, nor include any filming or recording of the public seating area. I am Councillor Leigh Higgins, the chairman of the Audit and Standards Committee, and confirm that we have the following Melton Borough Council officers in attendance tonight. The Director of Corporate Services, also known as the Section 151 officer, Garton, to my right, the Monitoring Officer, Alison, McKane, to my left, the Chief Internal Auditor, Ashley-Caunt, to my right, the Democratic Services Officer, Ted's, isn't it? Yes, thank you, I've pronounced that correct, and Senior Democratic Services Officer, Adam Green. Okay, apologies for absence.
Yeah, there's 2 apologies for absence.
I'm happy to read them out. Yeah. So we do have Councillor James Mason and Councillor Joe Orson. There's no other apologies or substitutions, though, are there? No. Okay. Okay. Minutes. To confirm the minutes held on the 28th of March. And I will ask Dawn Garton if she would like to recall the minutes from the previous meeting, because I know this is a new council and a new committee. So Dawn, would you like to confirm the minutes to your recollection?
Yeah, I'm happy to confirm that they are accurate. Thank
you, Dawn. If any other member was at that meeting, if they'd like to present something. Yeah, Councillor Webster. Thank you. So, as I understand it from advice, is all members are allowed now to vote on that, even though they weren't in attendance. But if you don't wish to vote on that, that's also acceptable. But can I ask for hands to raise that? That's a true account, please. Okay. Any abstentions? Okay, I think that's carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, members. Declarations of interest. Anyone would like to declare any interest on any of the following of the order paper? If anyone is unsure before the paper starts or the particular item starts, you can, if you then realise that you do have an interest, you can raise it at that time as well. But if there's any interest that you're aware of now, okay, no interests. Okay, draft annual governance statement. So Alison is going to provide a brief introduction on the report, and then we will open some debate. As this is our first meeting, what I mentioned earlier, if there are any questions on any of parts of the order paper, happy to take those as well. And no question will be what I would deem an inappropriate question or anything like that, because we're all new to this. So Alison, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, well, the Council has a legal obligation to conduct a review at least once a year of the effectiveness of its system of internal control and to publish an annual governance statement with the statement of accounts. The purpose of this report, therefore, is to enable members of this committee to consider and provide any comments on the draft annual governance statement for 2022-23, which is attached to the report at Appendix A. You'll see that this agenda also includes the internal audit annual report, and it's usual for the draft annual governance statement to be presented alongside that report, which will inform the contents of the annual governance statement. Once approved, the draft annual governance statement will be submitted alongside the draft statement of accounts for external audit review. And once the statement of accounts has been externally audited, the final version of the annual governance statement will be presented to this committee alongside the audited statement of accounts. However, I should point out that there is currently a national problem, as detailed in the account, in finalising the external audit of statements of accounts. And in common with a lot of other local authorities, the council statement of accounts for 2020, 2021 and 21-22 currently are remaining in draft form alongside the annual governance statements for those years. So just to clarify, the draft annual governance statement here reflects the governance position for the 2022-23 financial year. In terms of its contents, the annual governance statement is designed to set out in detail the council's mechanism for reviewing and providing assurance of its governance arrangements. Using the CIPFA and Solace framework, it sets out how the council is meeting the principles of good governance, as well as setting out how the council is addressing areas for improvement and risk identified by internal audit. So with that, are there any questions or comments? I'd be happy to take them.
Yeah, any questions on that, members? And just on that, Alison, thank you very much, because I know the original report author was Kieran, so you're following her very able footsteps. So thank you very much for that very in-depth report. So members, over to you. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone with raised hands, so the recommendation is to note the paper. So can I have anyone in agreement with that? Please raise your hands. I didn't know if we did for noting, but I'm happy to do that.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, that's fine, isn't it? If it's noting, yeah, that's fine. Thank you. Okay. Thank you again, members. Item 5, the internal audit annual report. Rachel is our chief internal auditor, and she's going to provide a brief introduction. Thank you, Rachel, for your time with Jim and myself earlier as the chair and vice chair, and bearing in mind we're new members to this committee. So I will open it up to you and then open up to the members. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. So as explained, this is the annual internal audit report and opinion for 22-23. So you have received this evening your draft annual governance statement for 22-23. And this report and opinion is intended to be a key source of assurance in informing that statement. And as you'll see, it is referenced within the draft annual governance statement that you've just noted as well. So the full copy of the annual internal audit report and opinion is provided in the Appendix A to your papers from page 47 this evening. So I'll just take members briefly through some of the key sections of the report, and I'll obviously be happy to take questions on any of the detail. So essentially this is a conclusion of all of the work that internal audit has delivered during the financial year. So this is what we're working to deliver for you as a council, and it sets out the basis for that within the report. So, sorry. So on page 49 of the papers is the annual opinion for 22-23. Within the box, we set out the opinion. Sorry, I just have a big cough. We set out the assurance opinion for the year. So the definitions are provided in section 4.1 of the report on page 52 of the papers. And as members will note, the opinion is given as a satisfactory assurance opinion, which is the mid-range assurance opinion for the audit opinions that we give ratings for. So within the table, within the box on page 49 is the full copy of the opinion. And the basis for it, I think you don't. Thank you. So the satisfactory assurance opinion, as we've said, reflects that the opinion that's in section 4.1. So essentially that there is mainly operated as intended. We have identified some areas for improvement during the last 12 months in terms of the controls that we've assessed. But overall, we've given that mid-range satisfactory assurance opinion, which reflects that there are no significant control weaknesses that we need to report to the committee. So the rest of the report sets out the basis for those opinions. Table 1 gives you a summary of the assurance that outcomes of each of the audit assignments. So these assignments were completed during the financial year and were set within the annual internal audit plan that was approved at the last March 2022. And obviously this was on a risk-based approach. So those opinions are then further detailed for you in table 3 from page 53 onwards. And this sets out the 3 levels of assurance that we've given in relation to each of the audits and the date at which they were concluded for the audit committee. So as you'll note, some of those were finalised during the last period since the last audit committee in March 2023. For those that were finalised during that period, we have given the assurances and the key findings for those in Appendix 2, which starts from page 61 of the papers. So you also have the full details. All of the other reports have been provided as part of progress reports during the last 12 months. So all of those were in the committee papers with the key findings and the basis for the opinion that was reached. So overall, going back to the summary, there was only one opinion during the year of less than satisfactory assurance, and this related to the control environment for licensing. So this primarily reflected the fact that there was not an active enforcement function in place at that time. So whilst the other controls were operating well, this undermined the overall assurance opinion. It should be noted, however, that none of the organisational impact assurance opinions are of anything above moderate. So if we had anything in the major organisational risk category, that would impact upon my annual opinion at year end and would be factored within the box at the start of the report. So also in reaching my conclusion, I obviously take into consideration all of those audit outcomes. I take into consideration the materiality of the findings, but also the actions taken by management in relation to any areas of weakness that we identify. So that could be in the design of the controls or in relation to the compliance element. So where we make a recommendation, we then track to make sure that the action is implemented in a timely manner and in line with the timeframe that was agreed by officers. So I have reflected on the implementation rates in table 4 on page 55, which shows that 58% of the actions which were due for implementation during the period were implemented on time. We still have a number which remain overdue, 13 of which are now over 3 months overdue. And we continue to track those, and those will continue to come to the Audit and Governance Committee at each meeting as part of your progress report. So you will maintain an overview of those. We also had a further 41 actions which had not been implemented and were not yet due to be implemented at the end of the financial year. So again, those will feed into our regular monthly follow-ups, and you will see the outcomes of those come into this committee. Given the number of actions that were overdue at year end, I have given a full summary of those overdue actions in table 5 on page 55 at the bottom of the page. So that gives you a brief overview of the breakdown of those actions. What I would reference is that the 2 high priority actions which are over 3 months overdue, which are on the first and third lines of the table, those are actually provided in full detail in the next agenda item under the progress report, where you have the latest update from officers. So I won't go into detail on those any further at this point. So also within the report is an update on the performance of the internal audit service itself. So we have delivered 100% of your internal audit plan. So we're obviously accountable to you as a committee for that delivery, and then making sure that we deliver a quality service. We also reflect on the feedback that we've received during the year. So table 5 on page 56 provides an overview of the feedback forms that we've received, which is pleasing to note that the vast majority are of either good or outstanding. And those are completed by management upon the completion of our audits. So it's just making sure that we're actually adding value with the work that we're doing as well. Also within the document from page 57 onwards, I've reflected on the professional standards that we have to adhere to in delivering your internal audit service, in order to give assurance that we are operating in accordance with these, and as such that the work can be provided a suitable source of assurance for you as part of your annual governance statement, as mentioned at the start. Also, just to mention within the report is an update on counter fraud activity. So just to clarify that this is specific to corporate fraud. So anything in relation to revenues and benefits fraud may be dealt with and investigated within the Revenues and Benefits Service. Anything that comes via internal audit, we do log, and that's what's captured for you in table 7 on page 59. So we've just got a record there of what's come in and the outcomes of any of those that have been concluded. And also just an update on the National Fraud Initiative, which is a proactive data matching exercise that we participate in as a council, which the internal audit team supports with as well. So that is a run through of the key sections of the report. As I say, section appendix 2 from page 61 onwards provides a brief overview of those audits which were finalised since the last meeting. And you do have the outcomes of all audits within the plan, within the report, within tables 1 and 3. So I'm happy to take any questions, Chair. I'm conscious that the committee obviously weren't here to receive a lot of those reports during the year. So if there was any further details that the members wanted, I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, and as I was saying to the committee earlier, if there are any questions, it doesn't really matter. This is the first one here. So if anyone wants to raise anything, please far ahead at it. And bearing in mind that some are new councillors, they probably wouldn't have known anything that was going on before. So any questions will be welcome. So members, over to yourselves if there's any questions from what Rachel's presented there. I mean, Rachel, I mean, just for my own interest, when you're going back to the tables, you was talking about counter fraud or for example, as this is relatively a new committee and those numbers there, was that higher than the year, or, you know, over a 5-year period, is the counter fraud activity sort of like within a tolerance level as it would be, or has it been higher than it would normally be or lower than it would normally be?
Yes, so I'm happy to confirm. Actually, when I compared these figures with 21-22, I think it was actually the same number of referrals, because I almost thought I duplicated the figures at one point. So it was a very similar level of referrals to previous years. We have seen them, they have increased since we set up the report fraud email address, because it does provide a clear means for members of the public to report any concerns to us. We have been publicising that email address as well during Counter Fraud Awareness Week. So I think that has helped to increase the figures, but as I say, it's pretty consistent with the previous year at the moment.
And just looking on table 3, which is page 53, it sort of breaks it down into different components. So we've got, for example, financial system key control, cybersecurity, going all the way through to information governance, and then fair, you know, relatively rag status to some greens and ambers there. Would there tend to be one that would be consistent, that, for example, the business continuity management, there all 3 are amber there? Does that have any historic part where it was green or was red and has moved to amber, or vice versa? Or is there any particular area? I mean, for example, special expenses, it's a relatively small budget for the council and relatively small remit, so I would always expect that to be more green than anything else. But there are more complex parts, for example, cybersecurity, and I know this council has been targeted by cyber attacks in the past. So is the ones where, as the internal auditor, would you sort of, there's more of a focus on part of those components than others?
Yes, so I would say the audit plan is focused upon risk. So it is informed by consultation with senior management. It's looking at your risk registers, also consultation with the audit committee as well. So it is focused upon areas of risk. So we would expect those risk-based audits like cybersecurity. So areas that we highlighted, for example, housing repairs contract, licensing, were highlighted for inclusion in the plan because they were higher risk. Some of the audits that we perform on a regular basis, so things like fixed assets, as we mentioned earlier, that they are more standard audits. It is a more standard area. We would expect there to be a good level of compliance. We don't have an approach now where we repeat audits on a regular basis because it is risk-based. So we don't have that opportunity to almost say that it's gone up this year or down, because we look at so many areas. But I think generally, I would agree that some of those more system-based, almost that there's not much opportunity for risk do tend to be more straightforward, but we do expect to find some things in the higher risk areas. And as I say, we're targeting areas where there are known issues as well.
One last question from me, and then I'll pass to Councillor Glancy. Is there, when you're looking at this audit, is there a part where you would then take one particular area, and for example, you wouldn't normally audit, when you would just go, right, well, we'll just look at that one particular focus? And I know sometimes, for example, say in crime terms, low level crime, it's obviously resources to catching the perpetrators, but now and again it's like, well, I have a focus on that because it's important not to just say, because it's low risk, we'll rarely look at it, but sometimes we'll just look at that just on that off chance to see if something's happening.
Yes, yeah, I completely agree. So we have that risk-based element. We also have some of those key controls that we look at on a cyclical basis. So, for example, with the financial system key controls, we don't test every control every year. We'll look at those on a regular basis, and then we'll think of something like fixed assets are taken as an example again. It wouldn't be something that would come up the top of our risk register, but because we hadn't audited it for so long, we thought actually it was worth looking at. So there's very much that risk focused element. There's the regular compliance, and then there's the general areas from the audit universe that we refer to around what we haven't looked at recently as well. So I think there is that mixture of coverage.
Could I just ask this? I mean, forgive my ignorance, but the fraud reporting mailbox, how does that work?
So we have a corporate email address that's set up, which is reportfraud@melton.gov.uk, and we have set up a website as well on the council's internet page with guidance around different types of fraud and where to report them, because some frauds people come to us with actually need to go to partners, so they need to go to the DWP, for example. If they're benefits related, then we're not able to investigate. There are other things we may suggest they report to the police, for example, as well. But if it is something we can look at, we advise people to report it to the report fraud mailbox, and that comes through to myself, and it's monitored on a daily basis. And I then log that and make sure that we follow that through as necessary. So hopefully that helps.
Councillor Hancock, yeah, Councillor Glancy, I know you showed it under earlier.
Thank you. Yes. Well, thank you. I think this is a really good report, and I think Dawn's team needs to be sort of congratulated for the efforts. I'm really glad to see that bank reconciliation is being sort of carried out and sort of very effectively. I think that's absolutely fantastic. But I do know that I've noticed on page 62 there's a sort of minor mention about reviewed and cleared, or clearing of the reconciliations have not been reviewed and cleared in a timely manner, increasing the risk that errors or fraud could go undetected. I presume we've put measures in place to sort of combat that and to rectify it. And also the housing former tenant arrears still remains high. I know this has been on the subject for audit and standards for quite a long time now. So can we have assurances that this is going to be targeted this time round? It does seem to keep coming back, and we do what we can, but then it still sort of starts to climb again. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, firstly on the bank recs, that was a problem for us. We got quite behind with staff shortages and obviously dealing with COVID. So we had quite a sustained focus on that. So everything's now up to date and we're keeping on top of that. And we've introduced a more streamlined way of doing those reconciliations so that any issues can be picked up a lot earlier. But then you're right, what audit have picked up is in order to get to that position, we've had to kind of park some of those differences. And now the team's trying to look at those and try and get them as low as possible. Ultimately, we might have to write some of those off at this time, but the main focus for me is keeping on top of that in the future and not letting a problem build up again. Sorry, the other question was about the rents, former tenant rent arrears. Yeah, I mean, you're right, that was a focus for scrutiny. So we had a couple of scrutiny reports last year on debts across the board, council tax, business rates, rents and former tenant rent arrears. Yeah, I mean, rents itself as well as former tenant rent arrears are both an issue that needs to be addressed. So there's quite a backlog, and there's also a staff absence in there. And I know that the housing team, they've got some additional resource coming in there. They're changing the policies and looking at those, and there's a lot of changes that they're looking to make, but it does remain an area that needs a lot of focus. I agree. So I would say potentially that might be something that maybe scrutiny might want to look at again, or it might be something when you're drawing the plan up for next year that you might want to include something quite discreet around that particular area and see what progress has been made.
Thanks, Dawn. I think that's probably a good idea, actually. Thank you.
Yeah, Adam, can we just make sure that that one's minuted quite accurately with what Councillor Glancy was saying, so we don't lose focus on that one. Thank you. Did I see hand up, Councillor Butcher? No, okay. Yeah, Councillor Atherton.
So coming back, excuse me, back to table 7 on, was it page 61, the investigation activity. You break down the referrals by referral type, and indeed there were 7, of which 5 were closed, and you tell us the outcomes, but other than the single person discount, it's difficult for me at least to relate those to the referrals by type. Could we put the in the same way that you've done the breakdown of referral type by category, do the breakdown of outcomes by category, and perhaps put the actual outcome in the comments so that we can relate referral type to outcome, please? Because I can't tell which 2 are still remaining.
Yeah, I'm happy to look at how we can link that a little bit closer. Obviously, we'd have to be careful with some of these that it's not identifiable as to the nature of the case. So we keep it a little bit vague for some of those reasons. But I'm happy to try and link those a little bit better in future reporting. Yeah.
And would it be right if, for example, say before the meeting, say Councillor Atherton or anyone wanted to ask a little bit more offline and to either approach yourselves or officers, obviously, again, within confidentiality remits, but
yes, so there would obviously be a limit as to how much I could say on this, particularly on certain cases. Obviously, we have to be careful not to jeopardise any potential investigations. So we have to be quite careful with any live investigations as to what we report and what we share. But happy to give some generic updates as appropriate.
No, I think that's a good point. The other thing I think Councillor Atherton does raise a good point is people take information in different ways, and for example, financial information. I think you were saying earlier, some people struggle to read a statement of accounts as the way an accountant would put it. But if you presented the information in a different way, they do understand it better. And I think I have said this to the chief executive before. Some people who like infographics and things like that, to understand what that information is telling them. I'm not one particularly, when you're looking at a statement of accounts, reads the numbers and the figures, but if you present it a different way, some people, like looking at information, either physically looking at information or in different graphics and things like that. And it's just so we can keep people included on that. And I think where Councillor Atherton was saying there, it's so no one feels that they're being lost with the information that's being presented. And if anyone does have that, wants to ask any particular questions before the committee or even afterwards, I'm sure we could do that to keep people included in. Thank you. Any other questions from any members on this one? Okay. Rachel, thank you very much for that very detailed part of the report, and it was very good to hear some members talk really positive about it as well. I would like to, again, this is another one for noting, so I don't think we need to take a proposer or seconder, but can we just all show of hands that we all note that one? Thank you. That one is carried. Agenda item 6, the internal audit progress report, and I think this was the one which probably may promote a little bit more debate, and I know especially for new councillors who are here, of what that could be and how the council has progressed on in the past and what you would like to necessarily see how it progresses in the future. So I very much encourage any members to raise any comments or and in our briefing yesterday, I did say to officers that I'd like to try and promote some kind of debate on this particular point, but I'll go over to Rachel again. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the internal audit progress report. So as I mentioned in the training with the committee, and as I've referenced in the previous agenda item, we do provide updates on the delivery of the audit plan throughout the financial year. And this will summarise the outcomes of any audits as they are finalised. As we are quite early in the financial year, we don't currently have any outcomes as such to report to the committee in terms of finalised audit assignments. As at the time of producing this report, we didn't have any finalised reports. We do have 2 audits which are actually completed in relation to housing voids and landlord health and safety, so quite a housing focus for the first quarter. And those will be coming to the next audit and standards committee in terms of the key findings of those audits. So I'll be happy to share further details then. So I just wanted, the primarily purpose of bringing this report today was to give the new committee members a copy of the internal audit plan. Conscious that the plan was approved by the audit committee in March, so it's the first time that it has come to the new membership of the committee. So there's a full copy of the approved annual internal audit plan on page 71 of your papers in Appendix 1. So it sets out each of the assignments that we're due to deliver during the financial year and the status of each of those. So as you go through the year, you will see those blue dots moving across from the left to the right. And once they are completed, you will see the columns for control, environment, compliance and organisational impact will be populated as well. So as I say, we've got those 2 audits that are concluded. So we are on track to where we expected to be at this point in the year. And we have planning work underway for some of the Q2 work. And so we are progressing well. So also within the report is an update on implementation of audit recommendations. So again, this will come to the committee as part of each of your progress reports. So that's provided in Appendix 2 on page 75, provides an overview. So this shows that since the last committee meeting, there have been 16 actions implemented. We currently have 31 which are overdue at differing degrees. So we have some that are less than 3 months, some of those literally just within a few days overdue of their original dates. We have some which are 3 to 6 months overdue and some which are over 6 months overdue. So what we always try to focus the audit committee's attention on is any that fall into the category of being over 3 months overdue and of high priority, because as an auditor, we have assessed that those actions represent a risk if they are not implemented. And as such, we think it's useful for the committee to focus your attention in that way as well. So for that reason, in Appendix 3 on page 76, and 77, you can see those 2 actions in further detail. As I say, these are the 2 actions which were also referenced in my previous agenda item on the annual report. And we have the latest update from the officers in the 4th column and where possible a revised date in the final column as well. So I won't go through anything else within the report further, but as I say, I'm happy to take any questions and hopefully this is useful for the committee to see what we are working on for you in terms of internal audit over this financial year and what you can look forward to receiving from us at future meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. I mean, we were discussing yesterday at the briefing, and so I'll raise this point. I know some members may want to just discuss it a bit later. I mean, we were talking about, for example, we've secured the levelling up funding. Large part of that is going to go into several particular zones into Melton, one being the cattle market site, which the council has obviously a vested interest in that, but equally being the not only the asset holder as well, is to make sure it's delivering good value, and when it gets implemented, then it's achieving the objectives and the goals to secure that. But as you were, could you elaborate a little bit more what you were telling me yesterday of how that will be audited, not just necessarily by this council, but other governance bodies, and how do we follow that? Because it's obviously a significant amount of money that's coming into the borough, and I think it's important for not only just councillors, but the public and businesses and stakeholders of the borough as well, to make sure that it's meeting the objectives of how and why we secured that funding. Because overall, it's good news. But we don't want anything to fall into white elephants or whatever, because the council is very much tied into that levelling up fund.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, I'm happy to mention that. So obviously on page 71, you can see we have 15 audit days allocated to the Levelling Up Fund within our audit plan for this year. We also have a further 15 days for the Shared Prosperity Fund and the Rural England Prosperity Fund work as well. So the reason we've included those in the audit plan is because we wanted to make sure we are giving assurances to the committee around how those projects are being managed, how that money is being allocated. Just taking a step back as well, I mentioned in the training session for those that attended, I am also the Chief Internal Auditor for Rutland County Council as well within our wider remit. So that's been really helpful actually in relation to this, because it means that I can have that oversight across both bodies and we can work together to make sure we've got the right levels of governance in the right places. So I think we need to bear in mind that money such as the Levelling Up Fund is subject to an assurance framework already. So what we wouldn't want to do is use your audit days to duplicate something that's already in place. But what I think we need to do is look at how we best support that existing assurance and map that out as to what we need to do as an internal audit team. So what I'm keen to do is to get representatives around the table from both councils and myself as in the middle of internal audit and map out how we want to use those audit days over the next 12 months. And some of that may be in an advisory role. So members will know in the report I've mentioned that we've done some advisory work in Q1 on the UK SPF work. So I think it's useful if we can to try and support things up front. But we also want to use that as some assurance work later in the year as well. So once we've had those conversations, I obviously hope to plan out how we plan to deliver those days and obviously report back to this committee. My intention is that it wouldn't be one single piece of work that we would do. I would like to actually follow the work throughout the year. So it'd almost be a rolling piece of work and live assurances. We're moving more to a real-time assurance model as much as possible with internal audits, the way modern audit should be delivered. So rather than us just coming in and giving an opinion at a moment in time, we almost do that embedded assurance approach across the project. So as I say, I think it'll be useful to get all of the parties together and work out how we best fit within that governance framework and obviously report back to the committee on that. So hopefully that gives some comfort around that coverage.
Yeah, thank you. And I know Jim's not here as the vice chair, but we've sort of suggested that if any member, not just from this committee, but if there are questions on that, we're happy just to Jim and myself to take that to liaise with yourself, Rachel. And so you know, you have advance warning of what members may be asking in the future, because as you say, what you don't want is at the committee that question necessarily to come in, and so if there are any questions early enough, I think if we could do that, that'll probably help yourself to do that investigative work to make sure that any response is thorough and for the not just this committee, but for the council and the wider stakeholders for the Melton Borough. So are there any questions on this paper? Councillor Atherton.
Just a very simple one. Looking at the table in Appendix 1, so that's pages 71 and 72, the numbers that are shown, are they days, man days rather than days elapsed and rather than financial?
Through you, Chair. Yes, so I can confirm those are audit days. So we are, as under the delegation arrangement between Melton Borough Council and North Northamptonshire to deliver your audit service, we are commissioned to deliver 235 audit days. So the vast majority of those are to deliver audit assignments. And all of my staff fill in timesheets as they're doing their work. So they obviously code all of their time productively. And that essentially gives us an idea of what we can cover during the year. So that's what's set out here. And obviously where we feel like we need to do a more significant piece of work, that's reflected in the days. And if we do deliver something on less days than we expected, we obviously have some contingency there and we can allocate that to ad hoc work. And obviously we bring back to the committee if we recommended any amendments to the plan as well throughout the year.
I just have one more, Rachel, if none of the other members have a question. Landlord health and safety, with a lot of the regulations coming in and changing all the time, and bearing in mind there's lots of legislation in regards to that, and it changes all the time. 5 days, how would that look like is in working on that? And then do you actually look sometimes to the future of potential risks as government or Parliament might be discussing what it may put in, and it's ideal, for example, and while it's probably not technically health and safety. Obviously, the properties, is it the EPG ratings and things like that? And so obviously you're looking at rewiring and obviously with the EPG ratings, you're looking at insulation and everything. But the government might be talking about that coming in 2 or 3 years down the line. There's no point us waiting until that comes in. We've got 2,000 properties. How would that one sort of in your focus? How would that look?
Thank you, Chair. So just to clarify, and it's a good point, obviously, given the budget's allocated. So just to explain, the landlord health and safety is an audit that we did, I think it was 3 years ago, in quite a comprehensive review, which resulted in quite a number of areas for improvement. So since we issued that report, we have followed this up on an annual basis, and the opinions have gradually increased. And when we performed the audit last year, which is referenced in the annual report earlier on the agenda, we gave a very good level of assurance. So that it was based on the regulations in place at that time. It was looking at our regimes for making sure statutory compliance on gas safety inspections, for example, electrical installations, asbestos, and all of those key controls that we'd be looking for in terms of our regulatory compliance. The reason we only have 5 days in the audit plan this year is because it was a good level of assurance last year, but what we've agreed with the housing service and with management is actually we want to continue to keep offering on the pulse a little bit with this, because it's such a key important area, because for me, it's one of our biggest risks as an authority. So whilst we're satisfied the control environment has improved significantly, we're just doing that little bit of targeted testing each year just to make sure we're still happy that everything's on track. So that audit has now concluded. We've tested a sample to make sure that the records that are being reported are supported by evidence and identify any gaps in that. So that's the reason it's only a 5-day budget this year. And it's just to give the committee and management that ongoing assurance, I suppose, around this area. In terms of the changing regulations, obviously with the new social housing regulations coming in, also you mentioned it around the EPCs, that's something we do factor into the scope of audits when we perform them. So as an example, when we did the asset management audit in the last couple of years, we did highlight the issue around the EPC requirements changing, particularly for leased properties as well, where we no longer just need an EPC rating above the limit at the time of a renewal or a new lease. It's now during the whole life of the lease. So a lot of these things are changing. We try to make sure that services are prepared for it before it comes in. So we certainly do factor that in wherever we can. So social housing regulation changes was something that factored high on the audit planning this year. And we do also have the supporting vulnerable people audit, which is below that on the audit plan. And that included some elements around that as well. So we do try to look ahead, as just talking about the audit planning process as well, when we're devising the plan for the year. And we're consulting with management. As I mentioned, we look at risk registers, we consult with senior management, we consult with the audit committee. And as part of that, we're not looking at just the risks now, we're looking at what's going to happen across the next 12 months. And a number of the audits that made it onto the plan this year, both at this council and other authorities, are due to changes in legislation and making sure that we're suitably prepared for those. So in short, yes, it's something that we do plan in and try to make sure we've covered off. Just as an example, within the environmental health audit on page 71, we are looking at the new requirements that we're expecting to come in that have not yet come in, but we're expecting around damp and mould in properties. So we're factoring that into that audit. So just to give you some reassurance on that basis.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. And just on that, and this is probably more for public consumption rather than councillors here, but if should anyone be watching this back on YouTube or live, the housing revenue account is a separate funded account, isn't it? And it's not, because sometimes when I'm talking to members of the public, they're saying they're paying their council taxes, but the general revenue from your council tax does not go into the housing management plan. That's a separate account, isn't it? The housing revenue account's entirely separate. And Dawn used to say that taxpayers' money doesn't go into that and vice versa. So it's important when lots of people are saying it's been a big focus of the council, some investment into housing, but it's not detracting. For example, when people say like the leisure pool or whatever, we can't cross that money into other facilities. It's just for information out there. I think it's quite important people understand how we manage our housing stock. Any other members with any other points on that paper? Councillor Brown.
Okay, I'm just looking at page 76, which is the two high priority items overdue for more than 3 months. The first of those items, if my maths are correct, is overdue by 3.5 years, which seems an awfully long period of time. Well, a particular question is, it says in the fourth column, latest update and reason for revised implementation timescale. It's quite a thorough update, but I can't work out from that why it's taken so long. I'm sure it's not through lack of commitment and a lack of recognition of the importance, but I think it would be helpful to understand what factors have led to such a long delay in that actually progressing.
I'm happy to make an initial comment. I don't know if Dawn's got anything to add as well, but when we did this audit originally in 2019-20, there were a number of recommendations arising from the audit, and essentially what we concluded was it needed a complete full service review. I think during that period following that, there were some changes in personnel and management of the housing service. We also then had a new directorate around housing and a real focus on housing going forward. And I think rather than just try to almost put plasters on a few of the things, I think the idea was to have that full review and make sure that it was fully fit for purpose. So it has been quite a significant piece of work, and as I say, it has been stalled, I think, and delayed at times during those changes in the structure of the organisation and how housing's been managed. I am personally comfortable with the work that's now underway, and I think that the amount of work that's gone into this means we will have a good outcome in terms of what we were looking for, rather than a quick fix. We will have a full review and a fully suitable service going forward that's informed by all of this consultation work. So I think that's my comment. I don't know if there's anything else to add.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Rachel said. You know, rather than having a quick fix, you know, it's been the idea is to do a really full review, and I think there's been a lot of progress actually, certainly in just the last few weeks alone. We've seen some things at management team. I think I take your point about there's quite a comprehensive update there, but obviously it's been very difficult for new members to see exactly where we are and when you can expect some of those activities to come to fruition. I think what's unfortunate is at the last meeting of this committee under the old administration, a member of the management team from housing came and gave quite a full update on where they were and what they were doing. So unfortunately, you know, they've had that at that old meeting. But if you did want more, then I could ask the assistant director to send round an update for members based on what she's doing, if you think that would be helpful. She did offer to come along this evening, but I wasn't sure that that was necessarily with new members an area of focus at this time. But I'm sure she'll be happy to send an email around just with a better, maybe a timeline or something, if that would help.
Yeah.
That is very helpful, and you know, you've already outlined some of the factors that have led to this matter taking such a long period of time. I think my key point, though, is this is a public document, and reading it at face value, it could lead to an interpretation of a lack of urgency in an important area. So I think my point was more to do, I knew there'd be good reasons, it was more to do with the fact that when we're producing public documents and there are issues like this, then we may need to give a fuller picture. We don't want people voted in the ONS survey about how happy they are in Melton based on misinformation.
Yeah, just on that ONS survey, I sent to some other councillors three years ago. Melton was the top, and I did hear what the leader of the council was saying, and was the data was quite narrow. I haven't looked at it. That I've had other things to do today, but equally, as I understand, it's reflected back on that, and what's changed since 3 years. But equally, if the sample is very small, you'll get a massive skew. 1 minute we're top, what next minute it's 393. Equally, though, from knowing members of this council and those before, is what I do know is the councillors are committed to their public, and should any member of the public require help, I know it's a core value of, I think, of all councillors who really care and try and outcome those, you know, change those influences for those outcomes for that. And interesting to note, Mike, as you were saying, is on Radio Leicester, I think they went round to interview and all of them said they love the area, but equally I do know that sometimes there's always improvements to do that. And I think you're right. The important thing is, while we've got that information there, it's easier when you're writing the document or you're involved in the information to assume that the reader knows more about it. But equally, and you've made a very good point, and as we were saying a little earlier, and Councillor Atherton raised, you know, we might need just to explain it a bit better. And yeah, I think that's a really good point. And if the democracy team can note that, where Dawn, I think if the assistant director could come back to the committee either on email or anything, and if anyone wants anything extra, we can either raise with the portfolio holder or whatever as well. So if we can note that comment from Councillor Brown there, thank you. Any other comments? Very good point there, Councillor Brown. No, right. Well, I'll just conclude just before we go on to the next item. But while I did write this earlier in today's email to this committee, I'd like to put on record and for the minutes as well to personally thank Councillor Don Pritchett for what he had chaired before, and he had worked with the officers as well to alter the Audit and Standards Committee, and he's put forward some very good recommendations, and I believe that's what we're trying to move towards as well. But the handover for me, and I think I speak for Jim on this as well, Councillor Mason, is it was very good and comprehensive, and that allowed us to see the work he and that previous committee had done, and I'd like to put on record the thanks to that committee, and we could follow that on. And I'd just like to thank, I know he's not here, but Councillor Pritchett for that handover. It was very comprehensive, and hopefully we can carry on that good work with the officers and as a committee together. So with that all there, and I don't think there's any other comments, just to note this report, if everyone can raise their hands. Thank you, that's carried, members. Okay, I think that's the end of it. Urgent business. Well, there's no urgent business that I've been made aware of, and if there's any members who've got any urgent business, no, and I will conclude the meeting tonight. So thank you very much for officers. Thank you for the training as well. I think was very good, and I'd just like to put that on record.